President Trump has now fired his top officials handling immigration and the Epstein debacle. It's a clear sign that Trump sees his administration's failures in these big areas. Now, Washington is still absorbing Trump's firing of Attorney General Bondi yesterday after a brief 14 months on the job. And she was often overshadowed in terms of what her general duties required by her key failures on Epstein. As part of Trump's steady drip of frustrations with her, the Journal reports, Bondi stoked expectations about releasing an Epstein, quote, client list. She raised the bar on herself and then later basically all but conceded she was lying, just as she lied to MAGA influencers by handing them binders claiming to contain Epstein files, which did not. A kind of fraud against your own base, daring them to speak out. And it didn't make a lot of strategic sense because these are influencers in the MAGA Trump punditry online. They post every day, and a lot of them posted angrily about being lied to. Bondi also overseeing a DOJ that was losing in court. Now, that's often because Trump's demands are flatly illegal. Troops in the streets, global tariffs without Congress, abusing power to try to indict critics with no evidence. So Bondi's demise is also a story about the courts working. And sometimes the way these things go down and the way the Washington elites and some of the media, quite frankly, talk about it, we can miss that. We get into the personalities or what's happening next before making sure we understand that 14 months just went by. There was a lot of failures. You see just a slight selection, handful of headlines about those failures on your screen. But this is a story as well about the courts working, albeit slowly. It's a story and a development about Trump losing, admitting it in public, having to replace his AG, and the rule of law holding. Bondi did not win a single case in Trump's vendetta to try to make the DOJ a sword against enemies, and Politico reports that was part of Trump's decision to oust her. And the good news for the rule of law tonight is that Bondi's replacement faces the exact same judges, courts, and rules of evidence that dealt her all of these losses in an almost absurdly long list of Trump enemies. Well, we've put this up before. Tonight it has a new relevance, but over the 14 months, they've opened all these cases. The green stamps show DOJ cases that already fell apart. Some others remain open as lawmakers are subpoenaed and harassed, journalists and government vets awaiting trial. So let me be clear about what this news means. It's a sign of a legally sick DOJ that so many of these faltering and failed cases were ever opened at all. But it's also a sign of a reasonably healthy court system in America right now that we know the facts and the evidence basically kneecap these plots to Trump's great frustration. And he's now mulling ousting the other top law enforcement official, FBI Director Kash Patel, supposed to be on a 10-year term, but Trump apparently doesn't care about that rule, as well as other officials. So why would you make these big changes when you also are trying to prosecute a war, which we reported tonight has its own set of emergencies and problems, and you have the economy to deal with, and you have the midterms now barreling towards you? It would seem that Trump actually knows his administration is faltering, and therefore he wants to do what he used to do on The Apprentice, as acting basically, but what people do all the time in different organizations, which is if things aren't working, you try to change personnel. But just think about this tonight. That would mean that Trump apparently doesn't know or doesn't care that many of these results, these failures, which he says himself are failures, I just showed you the articles reporting on them being failures, they stem from Trump's policy plans, not just the people he hired to carry them out. Washington monitoring any wider purge, and there were signs Bondi was on the rocks, including, as we reported on The Beat, that she had been publicly sidelined by her own deputy after the ongoing Epstein files debacle and on the rollout. After her failures, they basically said, all right, she's still technically Attorney General, but Todd Blanche was already kind of the acting Attorney General for Epstein. It was him you saw at the lectern. It was him signing the letter to Congress about the files. And if you remember the debates about redactions and all that, he was already running point on that. So we also have some fresh details on how this went down. Trump used the ride with Bondi to the Supreme Court Wednesday for another case that faces long odds, or experts say a likely loss, to tell her, look, I think it's time. an associate, apparently leaking that to the Journal. Now, she fought for a few more months to stay in the administration. Trump refused. And that adds context to the firing announcement he posted online where he said she would be taking a private sector job. He didn't specify which one, but in his world, it just meant she ain't staying in his administration. Now, Bondi joins a long list of Trump loyalists who have shattered their credibility, their professionalism, and their relationships for him, only to be publicly fired as soon as things weren't working out, even if the things that weren't working out was them faithfully trying to carry out his plans and policies, some of which are illegal and can't be carried out. Again, because we still have rule of law. Her acting replacement is another Trump aide who seems to think that somehow he'll avoid the fate of the person he's replacing, Bondi, and so many other people who have been dragged and discarded by Trump. Not to make light of this, but it's kind of close to the mafia movie pattern, where something bad happens to this gangster and another gangster steps up to say, I want that job. And you're thinking, did you see what just happened? You want that guy's job? But that's Washington. That's power politics. The deputy I mentioned there is named Todd Blanche. He is now the first acting attorney general ever who previously served as a president's personal lawyer. Those are two opposite positions. It's a conflict that has long been considered disqualifying, but as of tonight, not at Trump's DOJ. And whether he will take over permanently, we don't know yet. He is atop the list to be appointed AG, according to Politico. There's talk of some other individuals, but he would be the leader. He's obviously already on the job, and that is under the rules. The deputy does become acting AG if something happens to the AG. He recently went to the partisan CPAC conference and has been using Fox News to try to burnish his MAGA credentials. Now, for those who pay attention closely, we know that Trump has a vice president who called him, quote, America's Hitler. So you can overcome things if you are willing to do whatever Trump demands now, and you don't have any iota of pride or consistency about what you said you believed in your whole life. That's not really an exaggeration. That's just my introduction to remind you that for those following, Blanche was a registered New York Democrat before, for only reasons he knows. When Trump was a defendant in New York, he left his firm, moved to Florida, and went all in for then defendant Trump in that case.
The president reportedly, probably obviously frustrated that the cases against Tisch and Schiff and Brennan and Comey not really going anywhere. Are you the guy that's going to be able to get that done?
I appreciate the frustration because we do have to make sure that what happened for 4 years never happens again. And we don't talk about investigations, but I can tell you that the Department of Justice is working hard every day.
He is a shrewd enough lawyer that he didn't actually commit to carrying out illegal selective prosecution. But he did a different spin. He talked about what happened for 4 years as if that's the bad thing. But that's not the problem right now. The problem is the last 14 months, the failed cases, losing at the Supreme Court, the tariffs, the immigration, the revenge cases that have embarrassed the DOJ, sullied its reputation, but also disappointed his boss, who he thinks is his boss still, the President of the United States.
My thoughts are that Pam Bondi is unlucky to be in this situation in which she's getting run out of town. You know, you wonder if this was what she thought she signed up for. And you're right that there's a trail of people who were loyal to Trump and get discarded. And they kind of keep coming, right? Because there's a lot of power to be had in being the attorney general. But Bondi is being just sort of yanked off the stage in a way that there's no real grace in her exit. And, you know, one wonders if she has any regrets.
Gene?
Yeah, well, Pam Bondi really did try hard, didn't she? I mean, look, the attorney general runs up against an inevitable obstacle, which is the law, right? And the law, especially in the form of federal judges who are going to follow the law. And so if you try to do all these things that are unprecedented and against the law, you're not going to succeed. So to kind of make up for that, I can't help but think of her appearances before congressional committees where she was so combative and insulting in a way that obviously was for an audience of one. She was trying to show Donald Trump that she was more MAGA than thou, more Trumpy than thou, that she was really his warrior at the Justice Department. But then she'd go back to the office, and once again, there's the law. There are grand juries who won't indict on spurious charges. There are judges who will throw out cases that are without foundation. And Todd Blanche is going to run into the same thing.
Yeah, and I wonder what we could learn, Emily, over time. The DOJ must have a difference between ideology and law. And within the law, the given ideology of an administration is fine. Jeff Sessions was extremely conservative on many issues, including immigration, but he acted within the law, and he recused himself on the Russia and Mueller case issues because of the law. I mean, that's what he did. So some people might say they don't like him because of his ideology, but he has every right to have his ideology, as does the president, and he operated within the law. You go from Sessions, right, then you end up down with Barr, who got out before Jan 6th because he saw that writing on the wall. Now you get to Bondi, and I just went through it all, but it was another dissent, according to legal experts. And you have Blanche as a front runner who is literally the personal partisan enforcer of the president. He makes no pretense to the law, Emily.
Right. So with both Sessions and Barr, they hit a limit, right? They hit a limit where they said, my professional duties, my ethics are not going to allow me to do what the president wants. And they exited for those reasons. Bondi didn't have a limit. Trump decided that, in the way that Jean was just talking about, that she was not doing what he wanted, right? He didn't fire her because he has doubts about this weaponized version of criminal prosecution. He fired her because she didn't succeed at doing that.